Coming up on One Detroit, a sit-down with Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel. She talks about challenging the federal government, the Catholic Church investigation, and the reasons behind her priorities. Plus,
I felt free.
After 45 years in prison, Abner Hines comes home. Nolan Finley has the story of why his sentence was commuted and how long it takes for a life to change. And we catch up with Nolan and Stephen Henderson at Common Pub in Midtown. I'm Christy McDonald. One Detroit is coming up.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
I have a question. Who wants to go first? To win? Who wants to grow our business? Who wants to make more money? Who wants more job opportunities? If you want Michigan to compete and become a top 10 state, raise your hand. Together, we've turned Michigan around and started moving forward. Now help us build a stronger Michigan than ever. Raise your hand at strongermichigan.com.
Support also provided by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, Detroit Journalism Engagement Fund, and the Bill and Shirlee Fox Fund for Leadership and Public Affairs Programming at Detroit Public TV.
Hi there and welcome to One Detroit. I'm Christy McDonald. We're at Common Pub in Midtown and we have a lot coming up for you this week. I have a one-on-one interview with Michigan's Attorney General Dana Nessel. We talk about a number of things, including challenging the federal government, the state's investigation of the Catholic Church, her plans in Flint, and tracking down John Engler from MSU for an interview. Plus, Nolan Finley has the story of Abner Hines. After serving 45 years behind bars, Governor Rick Snyder commuted his sentence. You'll hear about his life in prison, why he's home, and how he says he changed. And we'll catch up with both Nolan and Stephen Henderson in just a few minutes. That's all coming up. But we're going to start with my conversation with Attorney General Dana Nessel. I went to her offices in Lansing 2 weeks ago for a wide-ranging interview. You've seen the AG's office in the headlines for her decision that the Line 5 tunnel is unconstitutional, her frustration with trying to get former MSU President John Engler for an interview, Nessel's agenda to take on hate crimes, and joining over 15 other states in a suit against President Trump's border wall. Well, just recently, Governor Whitmer asked for $2 million to boost the AG's investigations into Catholic clergy abuse. It's been a fast and furious agenda for Nessel's first 3 months in office. And then your office is
down here somewhere.
How would you explain to people how you prioritized what you were going to tackle first?
Well, I would say the first thing I wanted to do was to make certain that we extricated the state of Michigan from some lawsuits that I thought the state had no business being in, or that were quite frankly damaging to our state residents or to our natural resources. And to me, that was the easiest thing to begin with, was just to get out of those lawsuits. Turned out to be a little harder than I thought because so many of those lawsuits had been filed in circuits all around the country. So it took a little maneuvering. But, you know, to me, I ran on a platform of protecting our environment. And there were so many lawsuits that Attorney General Shirlee had entered that were devastating to the environment, whether it had to do with issues of clean air or clean water or climate change. These were things that were in no way going to be helping the people who live in our state. And I felt as though it was important to withdraw from those cases as quickly as possible. In contrast to that, I did sign on to a number of cases that I thought were very important. I thought it was important that we defend the Affordable Care Act in regard to protecting people with pre-existing conditions. And so we sought to sign on in order to defend people with pre-existing conditions under the ACA as quickly as we could. So those were the kinds of things that were outstanding that I knew we could do something about immediately. But in addition to that, you know, we had a number of different areas that I thought was so important that we get into. So we immediately created an auto insurance fraud unit. Obviously in Michigan we have the highest rates of insurance really anywhere in the nation. And a lot of it is due to fraud. And I've seen estimates up to $1 billion a year that is lost in fraud, and that in part contributes to the high price of auto insurance. So we established that unit. We established a hate crimes unit to combat the some 30% increase in hate crimes that we've had here in the state just in the last few years.
Do you still believe that state attorneys general should be playing this larger role in challenging the federal government?
I think they have to right now. They've been successful because the courts, even in very conservative circuits, have recognized that, you know, the federal government, many of the federal agencies have been overstepping their bounds and they're not complying with the law. And so when you have the federal government behaving in such a manner where they seem to be wholly disregarding the Constitution and wholly disregarding federal law, it is up to the state AGs to hold them accountable, and that's what I've been doing.
I want to get to a couple of specific areas of investigation that I think people are very interested that the Attorney General's office is involved in. The Catholic Church, and you have people across the state that are watching. How cooperative have the archdiocese around Michigan been with your office as you continue to investigate possible abuse?
Well, you know, that varies from diocese to diocese. And, you know, some of them have been more cooperative than others.
Do you care to be specific on who?
No, not right now, but we'll provide more information later, and ultimately at the end of our investigation we'll be doing a comprehensive report that I think is going to detail all of that. But what we've seen thus far is very disturbing. And frankly, you know, even though we were told in the early 2000s that the Catholic Church was really going to be cleaning up its act and that a lot of behavior was not going to be tolerated anymore, that really has not been our experience in terms of the documents that we've reviewed. There have been egregious acts of misconduct during that time period, and many of which a lot of senior officials in the Catholic Church knew about and did not come forward with it, and even worse, seemed to aid and abet in the cover-up of some of these allegations of sexual abuse. So, you know, we are determined to move forward. I've had a lot of pushback, I think, publicly about this, but to me, there is nothing more important than ensuring that people are not subjected to sexual abuse by clergy. And we want to put mechanisms in place to make certain that, firstly, people feel comfortable coming to us and coming forward to report this kind of abuse.
Are you getting a lot of calls? Is
We
the
are.
office getting a lot of calls?
We definitely are. We're getting a lot of tips, and we're uncovering a lot in these hundreds of thousands of pages of documents that we've been reviewing.
Do you believe you have all the documents that you need from the diocese?
Well, I mean, certainly the way the search warrants were executed, I think that they certainly did. They were able to remove an enormous number of documents. Now, whether there are documents that we don't have, and you don't know what you don't have.
I think it's very hard sometimes to put a date on when you'd like to see something done, but can you give people a sense of how long this investigation will continue, or are you saying in the next year or so that you might have some more answers for people?
Our goal is to have a finalized report within 2 years, but what we've decided to do is not really just wait until that 2 years is over in order to make recommendations, and we're certainly not going to wait if there's any criminal prosecutions that need to move forward.
You've changed who is going to be taking over the litigation in Flint, and with Kim Worthy's going to be overseeing that, and so there's been a little bit of delays in the criminal prosecution of Darnell Early and a couple of other things. What can you tell people about delay in when you make a change like this, and will there be some kind of eventual end here that will be in a speedy time?
Oh, absolutely, I think there will, but I think more important than doing things quickly is doing them right. And the fact of the matter is I was highly critical of the way the prosecutions moved forward during the course of the Shirlee administration. I thought it was bizarre that you would have a private firm handling all this and that it would cost, and I know we're up over $8 million for what turned out to be, 15 prosecutions, half of which were misdemeanors, and all the cases that have been resolved, I think, at 90-day pleas, many of them under advisement. That was insane to me. I did not think for a minute that these cases were being handled properly, and I put a new team together. I put my Solicitor General, Fadwa Hammoud, in charge to be working in concert with Kim Worthy. And I think anybody who knows Prosecutor Worthy respects her and understands that, you know, there is nobody that she's going to let off the hook, no matter who they are. But on the other hand, you know, she's not going to prosecute people that don't deserve to be prosecuted for political expediency.
Okay, let's move on to Michigan State and a very public battle that has been playing out over the last couple of days with your need to speak with and interview former MSU President John Engler, who said that he was not going to be in the state anytime soon, but indeed was in the state, taking on a basketball game or two. Where are you right now with communication with his team, and will you get a chance to sit down with him?
In terms of our opportunity to interview former interim President Engler, I think in some ways that's a question for him in terms of it being a voluntary interview. And frankly, all the hundreds and hundreds of interviews that had been conducted previously under the prior administration, those were voluntary interviews. And we would have expected the same of John Engler. I thought it was very strange, to be honest with you, when I came into office, that he was pretty much the only person of any import that had not been interviewed. And again, I absolutely suspected that there was some political consideration to that, as opposed to really getting the answers that we had to many of the questions about what occurred during the course of the scandal, the Nassar scandal. And we thought it was important because he played such a large role in terms of when he was brought in. And we had a number of questions for him, of course, about the resolution of the Nassar cases, but also information that turned up about the George Perlis resignation. And we thought it was very important to be able to interview Mr. Engler. We spent months trying to arrange an interview. We were told time and time again that he would not be in the state of Michigan. And we had long suspected, quite frankly, that his attorneys were engaged in forum shopping. And they only wanted Engler to be interviewed, firstly, in a place where I didn't have any prosecutorial authority.
Engler's team has come back and said that there's some kind of conflict of interest with someone in your office. How would you address that?
I would call it ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. What kind of a conflict of interest is there? Because we have an assistant AG that's trying to coordinate the interviews. You know, just because you don't like something that a person says does not mean it's a conflict of interest. I've handled thousands of cases where there might have been some bickering back and forth in terms of us trying to proceed onward with the lawsuit. You don't get to say that a person has to recuse themselves, and you don't get to decide, by the way, who your prosecutor is going to be.
So what can the trustees do about it, and what could your ultimate recourse be in this case?
Well, I know that the trustees are going to try to get him to sit for an interview, to do it here in the state of Michigan. How successful they're going to be, I'm not sure. We're evaluating our options right now.
All right, let's get some analysis on the moves the AG's office is making. Say hello to Nolan Finley of the Detroit News and Stephen Henderson of WDET Radio. All right, I'm going to give you each just a quick shot at what kind of job you think that she's doing so far.
I think she's doing a fine job. She's doing what you would expect a Democrat who's elected to that job.
She's doing a lot of the things that she talked about on the campaign trail.
She said she was going to do all of these things, so it's not a lot of surprise. I think, though, if you have an objection, it's that the AG's office should be more politically neutral. It hasn't been for a really long time. Bill Shirlee was one of the most partisan AGs in the entire country. He set the stage for whoever was going to get elected after him on the other side to come in and undo all of it. I would hope that there's a way to get back to this idea of the Attorney General as a person who interprets the law and advocates for the state in legal terms and stays away from some of the more charged political issues. But you can't put that burden on her, because they sure did not put it on Bill Shirlee or on Michael Cox.
So you're saying the big shift this way, big shift back over. What are the two things that are concerning you most of all, Nolan? You've written about a couple of them.
I think she's going to blow Bill Shirlee away in that regard. One, she's got her job confused with the legislature's jobs. She doesn't make jobs or laws, and she doesn't undo laws that the legislature has
she
passed.
does if she thinks they are in conflict with the state.
Her power. She can
I
say,
think it
she
is.
can offer that opinion, but it's not in her power. There's separation of powers here. And she is not the legislative branch, and she's pushing that. She's trying to be.
Well, if she
but my
steps
big
over there, the courts
objection,
will
the biggest
stop her.
What's your
objection
big
I have
objection?
with her is this hate crimes unit she and the civil rights director, Arbulu, have formed to, in their words, investigate hate that doesn't rise to either a civil infraction or to a crime.
So they want to keep track of incidents so they can possibly bring more conversation, understanding, or what?
Or shut down and harass people they disagree with. I think there's a Gestapo feel to this. You know, when you talk about tracking members of a group.
That's a pretty strong
Yeah.
statement
Well,
to
this
use.
is a pretty
to use
offensive.
to use that word.
And I use it intentionally because it's a pretty offensive idea that you would investigate people, keep track of people because they hold a different political
It's
view.
not
Is
about
it
a
keeping
different
track of
view.
people, or is it
Racist view.
I'm
keeping
just
track
using their own
track of
description.
events?
No,
It's
I'm
racist.
using their own description.
The idea
they
that
want to take groups that they find offensive, and investigate things that don't rise to a crime or a civil infraction. That's an improper role.
So, you know, there is always this weird call from generally the right when people stand up on the left and say, we're going to deal with some of the bigotry that conservatives either look the other way for or, in worst cases, help foment. And say, well, this is somehow inappropriate.
You can't shut down thought, Steve.
No, it's not about
No,
shutting down
hang
thought.
on. She's not saying shut down thought. She said
saying
that.
shut
How do
down
you know
thought.
that's not what they're going to do?
She's saying
when
keeping
she says
track of-
we're going to go after people
Yeah.
for things that don't rise to crime or civil infractions.
Do you think-
that's going after thought? That's
you
going
feel
after
like
political
it's
views.
not?
Going
It's
after people. How so? What do you mean? What do you mean by
When
going
she says
after?
we're going to take,
Yeah.
we're going to keep track of your membership list,
Sure.
that's an affront to free association. It's an affront to free speech. You can't defend that.
So at a time when we are dealing with more of this kind of activity than we have in the past, you think the Attorney General ought to just sort of sit back and say,
You don't suspend
no
the
big deal.
Constitution. You have
There's
a
nothing
right of free
unconstitutional
association.
about- there's
Some of the
not-
groups
you know-
that she's identified
Yeah.
are Catholic groups whose ideology she doesn't share. That's improper.
Or whose ideology is threatening the freedom of other people.
This is just a small part of what her agenda has been. I mean, there are many other things. And it's funny, I did this interview with her 2 weeks ago, and the news cycle that has come since then has been fast, has been very, very fast. Anyway, we're going to have to leave it there. You know, Nolan, you had a great story. You talked with Abner Hines on the day he was released from prison after serving for 45 years.
Yes,
His sentence was
tragic.
commuted by Governor Rick Snyder. And so it really is an interesting story about how long does it take to change a life.
Well, and that's the point, yeah.
We're going to talk about it in just a minute, but I want you to go ahead and take a look.
Oh man, there go all my nieces, man. Oh. When I walked out those prison doors this morning and I saw all the love that was sitting there, that family and friends and girlfriend and grandchildren and uncles, cousins, I was overwhelmed. I knew the definition of endearment. I knew the definition of love. I knew the definition of somebody that have been absent, of people that you think have forgotten about you, never forgot about you. Their presence overwhelmed me. It's not a word in the English dictionary that I can describe for the love that they showed me today. I said to them when I came out of there, they asked me how I feel. My simple words was, I feel all the way up, like the rap song, you know. I felt as light as a feather. I felt free. I know the definition of freedom now.
Yeah.
I could breathe.
You went to prison 45 years ago on a murder conviction. You don't deny that you participated in the crime. You never pretended that you were innocent. You didn't pull the trigger, but of course under Michigan law at that time, you were as guilty as the person who did. You were sentenced to, I mean, it was a bad crime. It was a stupid crime, but you paid a heavy price. It was a long, long sentence. When you heard that sentence come down, what was your reaction?
My reaction was, I was devastated. I felt empty. I felt like the world had ended. I felt lost. I didn't know where I was going. But it was one thing that always haunted me when I got back to that cell that evening. I thought I was a tough young man growing up, being involved in the gang. But when I got in that cell, something echoed in my mind. It was my father's voice. And he was saying to me, Al, get an education. They can never take that from you. Learn to think. Get your education. And that kept on echoing in my mind. And I wanted to cry. But the strength from the streets wouldn't allow me to cry because I still was living by street codes. Don't cry. You got to muster up. You got to be a man. These guys going to think you soft. So I didn't drop no tears. But mentally, I cried deeply. And I said to myself, I'm in big trouble. The only thing I got in my defense at this moment was the words of my father. Get an education. They can never take that from you.
And you did that in prison.
Yes. That's what sustained me over all these years.
You got your high school degree, college degrees. Now, when you first got to prison, you had a little trouble for a few years. At what point over these 45 years do you feel like something changed inside you and that you were a different person than the person who walked in the doors?
This transformation of thought happened about 7 years after I was incarcerated. Around 1982, I went to a service. They had an organization in that prison called the Morris Science Tip of America. And I went there, and they said that when God is leading, victory is sure. I remember those words. And somebody during that ceremony said, God is able, trust in him. And that echoed with me. So I said to myself, well, if God is able, then he can answer my prayers. So I prayed that evening, and I asked God to give me the intelligence to follow the path that's going to lead to my freedom one day. And I kept going to those services, and I kept listening to those men that was incarcerated before me that was trying to teach us younger guys values and morality and how to act and how to grow up and be responsible and be a man. And that echoed with me. I decided to change at that moment. If the professors at Spring Arbor and at Jackson Community College and in the educational process, the AB class and stuff like that, they always encourage us to come to school, learn. And that fitted with what my father was telling me when I was a child. So I started taking the little tests in school, and I began to see that I was getting good grades. I was getting A's and B's and stuff like that. I didn't know I was that gifted and I can understand and grasp things. I didn't know, I thought I was an average kind of person. But my grades told me I was better than average. So as I continued to get those grades and I got my GED and I got it with a nice score, I went to Jackson Community College, and the first semester I made the dean's list. That really inspired me. I ended up making the dean's list for the next 2 years, and I graduated from Jackson Community College with honors, and they gave me a gold certificate on my diploma. I sent it home. I was proud of that.
So at that point, do you feel, that was 38 years ago, 37 years ago?
Yes.
At that point, do you feel you could have re-entered society and been a productive member and a peaceful member of society?
Yes. It's a fallacy to think that it takes 20 or 30 years or even 15 years for a man to change his life around. Words have a way of saving, creating, as well as destroying. It just depends on what a person allowed to go in. It was something inspirational a guy told me years ago, a fellow prisoner. He said, Al, let me tell you something. There's a man with the hand, and there's a man with the eye, and there's a man with the nose, and a man with the ear, and a man with the mouth. You got to learn to control those different minds. You got to learn to tell your hand not to take something that don't belong to you. You got to tell your eye not to look at something you ain't supposed to look at. And he gave me the story about, I think it was King Solomon in the Bible when he looked at another man's wife and had him killed. He said that eye and that lust got him in trouble. If he wouldn't know how to control it, it wouldn't have happened. I took that to heart, and it motivated me.
What are your priorities? What are your plans?
One thing prisons have taught me is to use time wisely and not throw it away. I live in the now. And I tell my sisters and I tell everybody that will listen to me, when we gone, we can't smell no flowers, we can't hear no I love yous. Just love one another right here where we can hear and appreciate each other. So I plan, like I told them this morning in the prayer, I want to love all you guys. I want to get to know all you guys. I miss my family. I love you all.
Abner Hines does not claim to be innocent. I mean, he knows that he committed a crime a very serious crime and that he deserved to go to prison. And in fact, he feels like prison was a positive experience for him and that it gave him the resources he needed and the time he needed to change his life. But his life was changed a long time ago. His life was changed after 8 or 10 years in prison, and he spent another 34, 35 years behind bars. And to me, I don't see how that does anybody any good. He could have been out, a productive member of society, and instead we paid to keep him locked up.
And he looks like he has a good support system around him. What kind of struck you?
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the big problems we have in Michigan, which is that it's hard to get sentenced to prison here. You get more chances than you do in other states, but once they send you, it's harder to get out than it is in other states. We keep people in for way longer than is necessary and way longer than the average in other states. And as Nolan says, that sentences people to a lifetime of uselessness, which doesn't meet with the crimes they may have
It's
committed.
punitive rather than corrective.
Yeah,
and if we were looking at prison as a place to go to make people right and to make them safe to re-enter society, that should be the focus. But if we're just looking to send them there, we're going to forget about you for 20 years. What good does that do anybody?
It was a good story, and it was really good to hear from
guy.
him. Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to do it for One Detroit. Thanks so much for watching, and thanks to Common Pub for having us. We will see you again next week. Take care.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
I have a question. Who wants to go first? To win? Who wants to grow our business? Who wants to make more money? Who wants more job opportunities? If you want Michigan to compete and become a top 10 state, raise your hand. Together, we've turned Michigan around and started moving forward. Now help us build a stronger Michigan than ever. Raise your hand at strongermichigan.com.
Support also provided by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, Detroit Journalism Engagement Fund, and the Bill and Shirlee Fox Fund for Leadership and Public Affairs Programming at Detroit Public TV.